A millionaire wanted to test a homeless girl by intentionally dropping her wallet and seeing her reaction. Little did he know that the girl held a secret that would make him willingly trade thousands of expensive wallets. The city at night was a breathing thing, alive with muffled voices, the hum of distant traffic, and the occasional flicker of neon signs reflecting off damp pavement. William Holland moved through it like a ghost, his tailored coat wrapped tightly around him, his polished shoes cutting through the grime of the streets. He was an observer, a man who drifted rather than belonged, a relic of a past he could not escape. The girl appeared before he even registered her presence. Small, thin, and wrapped in layers too thin for the biting cold, she crouched by the curb, her fingers moving swiftly as she gathered scattered oranges from the pavement. An old woman stood beside her, frail and flustered, wringing her hands as the fruit rolled away from her grasp. The girl, no older than 12, maybe 13, moved without hesitation, her dark hair falling in tangled strands over her face as she placed each orange carefully back into the woman's basket. "There you go, ma'am," she said, voice light but firm, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. The woman murmured her gratitude before shuffling away, disappearing into the faceless crowd. But William kept watching. The girl didn't ask for money, didn't linger with expectant eyes like so many others on these streets. Instead, she simply dusted off her palms and melted into the shadows, slipping between the bodies that walked past her, as if she were invisible. It was a moment, a brief flicker in time, but it lingered. William saw her again 2 nights later. This time, she wasn't moving. She was kneeling beside a tattered blanket, pulling it up over a sleeping woman curled protectively around a young child. She adjusted the fabric with careful hands, tucking it around the woman's shoulders, ensuring it covered the small, curled-up figure of the child beside her. Then, instead of settling down, she stepped back, looking around as if searching for another space to sleep. The city offered no kindness. The best spots, under awnings, beneath heat vents, were already occupied. She turned and found a place in the open, against a rusted lamppost, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The wind cut through the alley, lifting her tangled hair, pressing against the worn fabric of her too thin coat, but she didn't move. William stood across the street, his hands buried in his coat pockets, watching. He didn't know why he was still there. He could have left, could have turned back toward his penthouse, where a silent, cavernous space awaited him. But he didn't. Instead, he walked away with the image of her standing beneath the streetlight imprinted in his mind. The next morning, seated behind his vast mahogany desk, surrounded by walls of glass and chrome, William found his mind wandering back to her. It had been years since anything outside his world of wealth and business had occupied his thoughts. His life followed an efficient, predictable routine. Board meetings, investment reports, deals signed with a handshake and sealed with ink. Yet today, his focus wavered. The numbers in front of him blurred, dissolving into the image of a girl braving the cold for the sake of strangers. By the time evening fell, a decision had settled in his chest. That night, he took a different route through the city. He walked deliberately, the weight of a leather wallet resting inside his pocket. As he neared the stretch of road where he had seen her twice before, he loosened his grip and let it fall. It landed with a soft thud on the pavement. He kept walking, moving just far enough away to remain unnoticed, but close enough to observe. Minutes passed. Then, from the corner of his vision, he saw her emerge from an alley. She moved with the same quiet caution, her eyes scanning her surroundings with an alertness that suggested experience rather than fear. She was about to pass by when the gleam of leather caught her attention. She stopped. William barely breathed. She bent down, fingers hesitating over the wallet's smooth surface. The weight of cash inside was obvious. The bills were thick, peeking slightly from the edges. She could take it. He had seen it happen before. He expected it. But she didn't. Instead, she looked up, not at him, at the people around her. She turned toward a cluster of makeshift tents and tattered sleeping bags, approaching the huddled figures within. Her voice was low, almost uncertain, as she held up the wallet and asked if it belonged to anyone. One by one, the others shook their heads. She lingered, chewing her lip, glancing back at the wallet in her hands. Then, slowly, her gaze lifted, searching. Her sharp eyes scanned the street and the crowd and then landed on him. William didn't move. The night air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of damp pavement and city smoke. Neon lights flickered in the distance, illuminating the wet asphalt in uneven patches. The streets had thinned out, leaving behind the quiet echoes of hurried footsteps and the occasional murmur of conversation from shadowed alleyways. William stood beneath the glow of a street lamp, hands still buried in the pockets of his long coat, watching as the girl approached. She walked with a cautious confidence, sharp eyes flickering from side to side, always aware, always calculating. The wallet was gripped firmly in her small hand. "Is this yours?" she asked, her voice even, neither accusing nor apologetic. William raised an eyebrow, glancing between her and the wallet before reaching for it. He didn't take it immediately. Instead, he studied her. Ragged clothes, a face smudged with the city's grime, but an expression clear of deceit. "How did you know?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smirk, but something close. "You're the only guy in a 3-block radius wearing a suit worth more than this whole street," she said, flicking her gaze down to his polished shoes. Didn't seem like it belonged to anyone else. William chuckled, more out of surprise than amusement. He accepted the wallet, slipping it back into his coat. Smart. Emily shifted on her feet, the moment stretching. She looked like she expected him to just walk away now, to tuck the wallet back into his expensive coat and disappear, just another passing face in her world. But he didn't. "Have you eaten?" he asked. She narrowed her eyes. "Why?" "I'd like to buy you dinner," he said simply. Emily's body tensed, just slightly. The question had caught her off guard. For a moment, she seemed to weigh her options, glancing down the street as if considering walking away. "I don't take charity." "This isn't charity," William said, voice smooth. "It's an invitation." Still, she hesitated. He let out a small sigh, looking past her toward the empty sidewalk. "I've eaten alone every night for the past 7 years," he admitted, the words slipping out in a way he hadn't entirely planned. He wasn't sure why he said it, why he thought it mattered. But it did. Something flickered across Emily's face, a crack in her guarded expression. "Fine," she muttered. "One meal." William gestured toward the diner at the corner, a place he had never once stepped foot into despite passing it countless times. It was a small, old-fashioned establishment, its windows slightly fogged from the heat inside. Emily followed a few paces behind, keeping her distance as if ready to bolt. Inside, the scent of coffee and grilled food hung heavy in the air. The place was quiet, save for an old jukebox in the corner playing something soft and bluesy. A waitress, bored and chewing gum, barely glanced at them before motioning toward an open booth. William slid into the seat first. Emily hesitated before taking the one across from him, sitting stiffly, as if unsure she belonged there. She didn't take off her oversized coat, though the warmth of the diner had already begun to thaw the chill in the air. A menu lay in front of her, but she didn't pick it up. Instead, her fingers traced the edge of the table. "Order whatever you want," William said, settling back. Emily glanced up at him, wary. Then, slowly, she reached for the menu, flipping through the pages with careful movements. She read everything, every line, her lips pressing together slightly, as if weighing her choices. A waitress approached, pen tapping against her notepad. Emily hesitated. "A burger," she said finally, clearing her throat. "And fries." William gestured for the same. The waitress scribbled down the order and walked away. Silence stretched between them. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her fingers still twitching on the table's surface. When the food arrived, she didn't touch it immediately. She glanced at William, then at her plate, as if waiting for something. Then with slow, deliberate movements, she picked up a fry, took a bite. It was small, but William noticed how she ate like someone who had learned to ration, who expected the food to disappear at any moment. She didn't shove it down in desperation like some would, but she didn't take it for granted either. Every bite was measured. William watched her, observing without speaking. "What?" she finally asked, narrowing her eyes. "Nothing," he said. She huffed, focusing on her plate again. "People always stare when they think they know something about you," she muttered, "like they're trying to figure out how you got here." William didn't answer right away. He could have said something meaningless, something polite, but instead he replied, "Maybe they just want to understand." Emily scoffed but didn't argue. Minutes passed. The jukebox continued its quiet hum. She finished the burger, wiping her hands on a napkin. When she looked up at him again, there was something less guarded in her expression. Just a sliver, a crack in the wall she had clearly spent years building. "7 years is a long time to eat alone," she said. William held her gaze. "It is." Emily didn't respond. She just nodded once, as if filing the information away. Outside, the city pulsed beyond the glass windows, cars streaking past in a blur of red and white lights. But inside, in the quiet warmth of the diner, something shifted. A connection, fragile, hesitant, but real, had begun. The rain had been coming for hours. The city knew it, felt it in the weight of the air, the hush that settled over the streets, the scent of something waiting just beyond the skyline. The neon signs reflected against the damp pavement, flickering in and out of puddles forming along the gutters. Inside the diner, the remnants of their meal sat untouched. Emily had finished eating, though she lingered, fingers absently running over the rim of her empty glass. William watched her, knowing without asking that she was calculating how to leave, how to end this interaction without owing anything. "Thanks for dinner," she said finally, pushing the plate slightly forward, as if marking the moment as done. "I should go." William glanced out the window. The sky had darkened further, thick clouds swallowing the last traces of city light. The first drops of rain had begun, tapping softly against the glass. "You don't have anywhere to go," he said, matter of fact. Emily stiffened slightly, her hands retreating into the folds of her coat. "I always find somewhere," she muttered. The rain quickened, turning from a drizzle to a steady downpour. People outside ducked their heads, hurrying to find shelter. William let out a slow breath, tapping his fingers against the table in thought. "You can stay at my place for the night," he said, his voice calm, as if he were commenting on the weather. "Just until the storm passes." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Number, I'm not some stray you can take home." "It's not about that," he replied evenly. "It's about not sleeping in the rain." Emily shot him a skeptical look, like she was waiting for the trick, the condition. He offered nothing else, just held her gaze steadily. She glanced out the window again. The streets had emptied further, rain hammering down against the sidewalks, soaking everything in its path. Her jaw tightened. Then, without a word, she grabbed her coat and stood. William's penthouse sat high above the city, removed from the world below. The moment they stepped inside, Emily hesitated, her shoes leaving faint wet prints against the polished marble floor. The warmth inside was immediate, almost jarring compared to the cold outside. She took in the surroundings cautiously. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-drenched skyline, a space so pristine it barely looked lived in. She lingered near the door, unwilling to move further in. "I'll stay here," she muttered. William frowned. "What?" "Right here." She motioned to the corner near the fireplace, where a thick rug stretched across the floor. "I won't touch anything." William sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Emily, there's a guest room." "I don't need it." The finality in her tone left no room for argument. She moved quickly, unshouldering the thin backpack she carried and setting it down beside her before sinking onto the rug. The fire crackled softly beside her, casting a dim glow across her face. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, tucking her knees in. William didn't push further. Instead, he watched as she curled up, her small frame nearly disappearing into itself, exhaustion pressing heavy against her features. Minutes passed. The rain continued outside, steady and relentless. William moved silently, stepping toward the linen closet and pulling out a heavy blanket. When he returned, Emily was still awake, staring into the flames with an unfocused gaze. He didn't say anything, just draped the blanket over her carefully, making sure it covered her completely. She didn't move, didn't protest. Her breathing softened, deepened. William stood there for a moment, studying her in the dim light. The rain against the windows, the slow rise and fall of her shoulders, the faint crackling of the fire. It all settled into something quiet, something almost fragile. Then, without thinking, he bent down and lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, her body curled instinctively inward even in sleep. He carried her through the silent expanse of the penthouse, down the hall to a room that had remained untouched for years. He laid her gently on the bed, adjusting the blanket around her. For a long time, he just stood there, watching. If Claire had lived, she would be this age now. The thought struck unexpectedly, an ache sharp enough to hollow him out. Shaking his head slightly, he stepped back, pulling the door closed behind him. For the first time in years, the penthouse did not feel quite so empty. The storm had not let up. Dawn broke slowly, the city wrapped in the muted hush of rain against glass. The sky remained a heavy grey, pressing down over the skyline, and the streets below were washed clean, the neon reflections distorted in the puddles. The world felt quieter than usual, as if even the city had decided to stay in bed a little longer. Inside the penthouse, the warmth of the fire still lingered in the air, the faint scent of burning wood mixed with the crisp morning cold that seeped through the cracks of the vast windows. Emily stirred. For a moment, she didn't move, her mind still caught in that hazy space between sleep and waking. The softness beneath her was unfamiliar, the weight of a real blanket pressing down over her shoulders foreign. Her breath hitched slightly, her body tensing before her eyes even opened. When she did open them, she blinked in confusion. This wasn't the floor by the fireplace. The room around her was spacious but empty of excess. Dark wood furniture, white linens, a large window streaked with raindrops. She sat up abruptly, her hands gripping the blanket as if it might disappear the moment she moved. Her pulse quickened. Then she remembered. The storm, the invitation, the quiet, steady presence of the man who had brought her here. Her fingers curled into the fabric of the blanket before she forced herself to exhale, to shake off the brief panic. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, pushing herself up. The moment her feet touched the floor, a familiar sense of detachment settled in her chest. This wasn't hers. She didn't belong here. She slipped out of the room, moving as quietly as she could down the hallway, her bare feet silent against the polished floors. The scent of coffee hit her first. William was already awake, seated at the dining table, reading something on his tablet. He didn't look up as she entered, didn't react immediately. He simply reached for the second cup of coffee sitting on the table beside him and slid it forward. Emily hesitated. "Morning," he said, still not looking at her. His tone was casual, as if this were normal, as if she hadn't woken up in a place that wasn't meant for people like her. She didn't respond, but she took the coffee, her fingers wrapping around the warmth. It steadied her more than she cared to admit. Without a word, William stood and walked toward the kitchen. A moment later, he returned with a plate, setting it down in front of her. Toast, eggs, fruit, simple but deliberate. He sat back down, sipping his coffee, as if this was just another morning, as if she wasn't something temporary. Emily stared at the plate for a long moment. She wasn't used to this. Still, she picked up the toast and took a bite, chewing slowly, testing the moment like it might shatter if she moved too fast. William finally spoke. "So, are you going to tell me your name, or do I just keep calling you Hey You?" Emily glanced up at him, her chewing slowing. She swallowed before responding. "Emily," she said, voice quiet but firm. "Emily Cole." William nodded, setting his coffee down. "William Holland." Emily gave him a dry look. "Yeah, I figured. Like the business card in your wallet." A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Smart." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft tap of rain against the windows. Emily focused on her food, picking at the fruit absent-mindedly. William didn't press her, didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. But she spoke anyway. "St. Michael's Orphanage," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "That's where I was." William didn't react, just sipped his coffee, waiting. "It burned down a year ago," she continued. "A fire started in the kitchen, spread too fast for them to control it. Some kids got out, some didn't." She didn't say which group she had been in. She didn't need to. William's fingers tightened slightly around his mug. "No one came for me after," she added. "Guess I was old enough for people to stop caring." There was no emotion in her voice, no bitterness, just a simple statement of fact. She set her fork down, suddenly losing her appetite. William studied her for a moment, his gaze sharp, assessing. "You don't talk about it much, do you?" he asked. Emily shrugged. "Talking doesn't change anything." "No," he agreed, "but sometimes it helps." She scoffed lightly, leaning back in her chair. "That what you do? Talk about things?" William exhaled through his nose, a quiet sound of amusement. "Not really." Emily tilted her head slightly, considering him. "Then why'd you tell me you've been eating alone for 7 years? His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. A subtle shift, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. "You looked like you'd understand," he said simply. Emily didn't respond right away. She traced the rim of her coffee cup, her gaze drifting toward the rain-streaked window. The storm hadn't stopped. She knew she should leave. She had stayed longer than she intended, longer than was safe for someone like her. But the thought of walking out into the cold, of finding another dry place to sleep, made her hesitate. She hated that. William tapped his fingers against the table, thoughtful. "The rain's not letting up." Emily tensed. "So? So you can stay until it does." It wasn't a command. It wasn't even an offer. Not really. Just a statement. A simple, open-ended fact. Emily hesitated for only a moment before picking up her fork again. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. After breakfast, William remained at the dining table, his laptop open, fingers moving methodically across the keyboard. His morning meetings were postponed, his usual routine disrupted by the unexpected presence of the girl sitting on the couch, knees pulled up to her chest. Emily had been quiet, her eyes flickering toward the television more than once. She shifted, hesitated, then finally asked, "Can I, watch TV?" William glanced up from his screen, then nodded toward the remote on the coffee table. "Go ahead." She reached for it, fingers hovering over the buttons as if unsure where to start. After a moment, the screen flickered to life, filling the room with a low hum of voices. William expected her to settle in, maybe lose herself in whatever show she found, but instead, she turned back to him. "You don't have to give me a bed," she said suddenly, her voice careful, as if gauging his reaction. I don't need it. I'll sleep by the fire again. I don't want to dirty anything up." William exhaled, shutting his laptop halfway as he regarded her. "Emily," he said evenly, "you are the purest thing that exists in this house." She stilled. His words hung between them, sinking in. Her fingers tightened slightly around the remote, her throat working around an emotion she didn't name. For the first time in a long time, she had nothing to say. The rain had eased, but had not yet ceased. The morning stretched long and slow, the grey light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting faint reflections across the polished surfaces of William's home. The air still smelled of damp stone and city smog, but inside, the scent of coffee and firewood lingered longer. Emily sat curled in the corner of the couch, the remote lying unused beside her. Cartoons no longer excite her as much as they did when the TV first turned on, her attention instead drawn to the unfamiliar vastness of the space around her. After a while, she shifted. "Can I read something?" William, still seated at the dining table, barely glanced up from his laptop. "Read?" Emily hesitated before nodding toward the large bookshelves that lined one of the walls. "Yeah, a book. It's been a while. A full year, to be exact. Since before the fire. Since before St. Michael's had gone up in smoke, taking with it the only real semblance of stability she had ever known." William studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the library. "Go ahead." Emily slipped off the couch, moving cautiously across the room as if she expected the permission to be revoked. The library was dimly lit, the smell of aged paper and polished wood welcoming in a way she hadn't anticipated. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, the worn edges smooth under her touch. Too clean, too empty. She didn't know what she was looking for. And then, she found it. The shelf was slightly out of place, one section of books pushed in further than the others. Emily frowned, stepping closer. Tucked between thick, heavy volumes of literature, a small collection of leather-bound photo albums rested side by side. Something about them made her reach out. She pulled one from the shelf, dust settling in the air as she flipped it open. The first page was ordinary enough, an elegant script marking a date from years ago. But as she flipped through, her breath stilled. A little girl stared back at her, dark hair, bright eyes, smiling in some pictures, caught mid-laugh in others. Photos of birthdays, of a family trip by the sea, of a life that once was. Emily's fingers hovered over one image. A man, younger than now, standing beside the girl, his hand resting on her shoulder. William. Emily's stomach twisted. She turned the page. More photos. A mother, soft features, warm eyes, holding the little girl in her arms. The three of them together. A family. Emily's grip on the album tightened. The air shifted behind her. William's voice, quiet but firm, cut through the silence. "What are you looking at?" Emily flinched slightly, but didn't close the album. She turned her head, meeting his gaze. His expression was unreadable, but something behind his eyes darkened, something restrained. She glanced down at the picture again, then back at him. "She looks like someone I knew." The words felt heavier than she expected them to. William stepped forward, his gaze dropping to the page she had been staring at. His jaw tensed almost imperceptibly. "That's my daughter," he said, his voice even, almost distant. "Claire." Emily nodded slowly, her mind catching on the name. Claire. The little girl in the pictures. The name sounded delicate, familiar in a way she couldn't place. She hesitated before speaking again. "I had a friend once, in the orphanage." William's eyes flickered. "Her name was Janet." Emily's voice was quieter now, careful. "She kind of looked like her. William exhaled, the tension in his posture shifting. A coincidence? Maybe, Emily said, but she didn't close the album. Instead, she turned back to the photo, studying the details more closely. The curve of Claire's smile, the sharpness in her eyes. There was something about it, something that made her chest tighten. Then she saw it. Her voice came out softer this time, almost uncertain. She had a birthmark. William's entire body went still. Emily swallowed. On her arm, a little fish, right here. She pointed to the inside of her forearm, just above the wrist. William's breath caught. The silence in the room changed, thickened. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Lower. How do you know that? Emily didn't answer right away. She stared at the photo, at Claire's small hands, her short sleeves. She had never noticed before, not in the orphanage, not in the years they had spent side by side, but now the memory was sharp. The way Janet would absently rub at that spot on her arm, the way she used to joke that it looked like a tiny fish swimming just under her skin. Emily's mouth was dry. She told me, she said finally. William reached out, turning the page carefully, as if he needed to see something, as if confirmation could be found in ink and paper. But the photos remained unchanged, a past frozen in time, a child who had once been here and then gone. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. Janet didn't make it out of the fire, she thought to herself, because this was too painful to say out loud. William's fingers curled slightly against the page. For the first time in years, the name Janet felt like a ghost clawing its way into the present. When you hear this, is the sky still bright or dark where you are? If it's bright, comment sunflowers. If it's dark, comment peony. The room was suffocating, not in the way of heat or air, but in the way memories had a way of pressing against the ribs, tightening around the lungs until breathing felt like an afterthought. William stood still, his hands resting at his sides, the weight of Emily's words settling into his bones like a dull, steady ache. A birthmark, a small fish just above the wrist. It wasn't possible. It wasn't. But it was. The moment stretched, heavy and fragile, balancing on the thin edge of disbelief and something far worse, hope. Emily had gone quiet. She was watching him, cautious but not afraid, as if she knew she had unearthed something she wasn't meant to. Her fingers traced the edge of the album, but she didn't turn the page again. William swallowed hard, his voice hoarse when he finally spoke. Keep reading. Emily's brows furrowed slightly, but she nodded, shifting her attention back to the book in her lap. William turned away. His steps were measured, controlled as he exited the library, moving down the long hallway toward his office. The moment he was out of sight, the tension in his body unraveled just slightly, his fingers pressing into his temples as he let out a slow, shaky breath. This was absurd. This was impossible. And yet, his hands trembled as he reached for his phone. The call was dialed before he could second-guess it. It rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered. Holland? The man on the other end sounded groggy, as if he hadn't expected a call at this hour. I need you to find someone, William said, his voice steadier than he felt. There was a pause. Then, that's what you pay me for. Who? William stared out the rain-streaked window, his jaw tight. I need you to look into St. Michael's orphanage. There was a girl there, Janet. She died in the fire a year ago. He exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down his face. I need to know where she came from. Another pause. The faint sound of keys clicking in the background. Any last name? No. William's grip tightened on the phone. Just find out what you can. Anything. And cross-check it against my daughter. Claire. The name nearly broke him as it left his lips. The detective didn't hesitate. I'll start digging. The call ended. William lowered the phone slowly, his reflection staring back at him through the window. His own face looked unfamiliar, strained, older than it had any right to be. Claire. He closed his eyes, but that only made the memories sharper. Her laugh. The way she used to cling to his leg when she was small, the scent of salt water in her hair when they came back from the beach. The way she had smiled in those photos, unaware of the cruel twist fate had been waiting to deal her. Or had it? Had fate spared her, only to deliver her to a different kind of suffering? Had she survived only to be lost again? The thought made his stomach twist violently. He forced himself to breathe. The waiting would kill him. He needed answers now, but all he could do was let the storm rage and hope that, for once, it would clear to reveal something other than another grave. Back in the library, Emily sat in the quiet, her eyes skimming over the photographs, searching for something, anything, that would make sense of what she had just set into motion. The night stretched long, heavy with silence. Rain still tapped softly against the windows, but the storm had lessened, retreating into a steady, unrelenting drizzle. The world outside remained grey and blurred, as if the city itself had become a reflection of William's mind, disordered, tangled, and filled with too many ghosts. Inside the penthouse, William sat in his office, fingers steepled together, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. His phone lay on the desk, silent for now, but he knew the call would come soon, answers would come soon, and yet he wasn't sure he wanted them. The weight in his chest was unbearable. In the next room, Emily had gone quiet. She had stopped flipping through the album long ago, but he knew she hadn't gone to sleep. He could feel the weight of her presence, the shift in the air. She was waiting too. Then his phone rang. William snatched it up before the second ring. "Tell me." The detective on the other end sighed, a sound of exhaustion and something else, something heavier. "You're not going to like this, Holland." William gripped the edge of the desk. "Just say it." There was a shuffle of papers, then the voice came again, slower this time, measured. "The girl from St. Michael's, Janet. She was taken in as a child by a woman named Deborah Whitmore, a fisherman's widow from a coastal town up north. No records of biological parents, no adoption papers, just found." William's breath turned sharp. Found. She washed up on shore after a shipwreck. The year matches the accident that took your wife and daughter. The detective hesitated. The reports at the time assumed Claire's body was lost to the sea. But what if it wasn't? What if she survived? The room tilted slightly. William forced himself to stay still, to breathe, to listen. "Deborah raised her," the man continued. "By all accounts, she was a good woman, kept the girls safe. But she passed away a few years ago, and without any legal guardianship, Claire, Janet, was placed in St. Michael's. The fire took everything before she could ever be traced." A long pause. William's pulse roared in his ears. The girl in the orphanage, Janet, his daughter. He swallowed, his throat dry. His mind refused to accept it, even as his body understood, even as something inside him shattered into 1,000 pieces. Claire had lived. She had survived the sea, survived years of uncertainty, survived a life away from the father who had never stopped mourning her, only to die in an orphanage fire, alone. William squeezed his eyes shut. The air felt too thin. His heart pounded. The office around him blurred, became something unreal. He had mourned his daughter once. The grief had nearly destroyed him. But now, it felt like he was mourning her all over again, except worse, because this time he had been too late. The line crackled with static before the detective spoke again, voice gentler. "I'm sorry, William." William exhaled shakily, gripping the phone tighter. "You're sure?" "I triple-checked everything," the detective said. "Janet was Claire." A pause. and Emily was her closest friend. William stiffened. Emily. His mind snapped back to the girl sitting just beyond this room, small and quiet, her fingers tracing over the faded photographs of a sister she didn't know she had lost. William barely whispered his next words. She guessed. The detective hesitated. She might have suspected, but I don't think she knew the full truth. She was just a kid, same as Janet. But she lost her too. William ended the call without another word. For a long moment, he sat there, staring at nothing, his hands clenched into fists. Then, movement. A shift in the air, a presence where there shouldn't have been one. Slowly, he turned his head toward the office door. Emily stood there, small and motionless, her face pale, her eyes wide and unreadable. His blood ran cold. She had heard everything. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She looked like she wanted to say something, wanted to run, but her feet remained rooted in place, frozen in the weight of the revelation that had just torn through her world. William's chest ached. Emily! But she shook her head, once, twice. Then she turned and walked away. Not run, not bolted, just walked. And somehow, that was worse. Emily sat on the couch in the dim glow of the fireplace, knees pulled tightly to her chest, the weight of everything pressing down like an iron vice. Janet had been Claire. Claire had been Janet. The girl she had loved like a sister, the girl who had given Emily more kindness than the world ever had once been someone else, had once been wanted, had once had a father who had never stopped looking for her, and Emily had lived while she hadn't. Her mind spiraled back to that night, the heat, the thick smoke curling into her lungs, the way Janet had pushed her forward, her voice sharp, urgent. Go, Em, don't stop. She had run, she had escaped, and Janet, Claire, hadn't. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, her nails digging into the fabric of her sleeves. This wasn't right. None of it was right. She was in the place Janet should have been, sleeping in a warm bed, eating meals prepared without hesitation, sitting in a house where her best friend's picture hung on the walls as if she were still alive. Emily's stomach twisted violently. She couldn't be here. Not anymore. The hours that followed stretched painfully long. William didn't follow her, not immediately. He had thought she needed space, time to process what she had overheard. But then morning came, and Emily was gone. He found the blanket from the couch neatly folded, the remote placed exactly where it had been before she had ever touched it. The books remained in the library, the album left open to a page where Janet, Claire, was caught mid-laugh, frozen in time, unaware of the cruel trick fate had played on her. Emily had vanished without a trace. William pressed a hand to his forehead, inhaling sharply. He should have known, should have seen it coming. She blamed herself. He could see it now, the way her fingers had tightened around the photo, the way her eyes had darted toward him, as if waiting for the words to confirm what she already feared. Janet had died saving her. And now, she thought she didn't deserve to be here. William grabbed his coat, the movement sharp, controlled, his mind already narrowing in on one single focus. Find her. Bring her back. Before he lost her too. The city had never felt so vast. William drove with one hand clenched around the steering wheel, the other gripping his phone as he made call after call. Streetlights flashed past, neon signs bleeding into the wet pavement. The early morning rain had faded into a misty drizzle, casting an eerie glow over the empty streets. Emily was out there somewhere, alone. The thought churned in his gut like a sickness. The detective hadn't been able to trace her movements. She had no phone, no bank account, and no paper trail to follow. Just a ghost slipping back into the shadows she had once called home. William's chest ached with something raw, something sharp. He should have seen it coming. He had been so consumed by his own grief, by the staggering realization that his daughter had been alive, only to be taken from him all over again, that he hadn't seen the weight pressing down on Emily. Hadn't noticed the way her hands had clenched when she realized who Janet really was. Hadn't understood until now that she had already decided she didn't deserve to stay. He slammed his foot against the brake at a red light, inhaling sharply, forcing himself to think. Where would she go? He knew she wouldn't have left the city. Not yet. Not in the middle of the night, with nowhere to go, no money to take her further than her own 2 feet could carry her. And then it hit him. The fire escape. The alley behind St. Michael's. She had mentioned it once in passing, back when she'd first told him about the orphanage. Some of us used to sneak out to the fire escape at night. It was the only place that felt safe. William turned the car sharply, tires skidding against the wet pavement as he sped toward the only place that made sense. He found her huddled in a narrow alleyway, curled against the side of a rusted dumpster, knees pulled to her chest. Her hoodie was soaked from the damp air, her thin sneakers pressing into the wet concrete. She didn't look up when his shadow fell over her. She had known he would come. William's breath was unsteady as he crouched down in front of her, his knees hitting the cold ground. He didn't reach for her, didn't speak right away. Emily's arms tightened around herself, her fingers digging into the fabric of her sleeves. "I didn't mean to hear it," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just—" She exhaled shakily, her head tilting downward, her forehead pressing against her knees. "I didn't know." William swallowed. "Emily, she saved me," she said suddenly, her voice raw, as if the words had been clawing at her throat all night. That night, when the fire started. He stilled. She let out a slow, uneven breath. "We were in the dorms when the alarms went off. Smoke was already coming under the door, and everyone was screaming. We ran, most of us. But Janet—" She hesitated, her shoulders trembling slightly. She turned back. William's fingers curled into fists against his thighs, but he didn't interrupt. "There was this little kid, a girl, Trina. She was stuck under one of the beds, too scared to move." Emily's voice cracked. "I was too scared too. I didn't help. I just stood there while Janet crawled under the bed and pulled her out." Her breathing was ragged now, her eyes squeezed shut. "She shoved her into my arms and told me to run. I didn't want to. I wanted to stay, but she—" Emily bit down on her lip so hard it nearly bled. "She pushed me toward the door. And then—" She choked on the words, shaking her head violently. The ceiling collapsed before she could get out. Silence. The weight of it pressed down on them, thick and suffocating. William exhaled slowly, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. "She saved me," Emily whispered. "She died so I could run." Her fingers curled against her sleeves. "She should be here," she said, her voice cracking. "Not me." William's heart twisted, a pain so deep it stole his breath. He reached out then, hesitating only for a moment before resting a firm, steady hand on her shoulder. "She would want you to be," he said quietly. Emily flinched, but she didn't pull away. "She would have wanted you to live, Emily. She made that choice for you." His voice was even, but there was something in it, something raw, something unshakable. "Don't throw away the only thing she asked of you." Emily's breath hitched. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. William's grip on her shoulder tightened, his fingers warm despite the cold air pressing in around them. "You deserve to live." She finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, hollowed by exhaustion, but there was something else in them now, something cracked but not broken. William exhaled, his voice steady when he spoke again. "I lost my daughter twice." His throat tightened. "I'm not losing you too." A tear slipped down Emily's cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. For the first time since she had left, she let herself breathe. A long, uneven inhale, a slow, hesitant exhale. William watched her, waiting. Then finally, she nodded. Not much. Not a full acceptance, but enough, and for now, that was all he needed. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. Emily sat in the passenger seat, her knees pulled up, arms wrapped tightly around them. Her gaze stayed fixed on the city beyond the window, watching the neon signs flicker and blur against the damp pavement. William didn't press her to speak, didn't ask her anything. She had agreed to come back. That was enough for now. But something between them had changed. It wasn't just the weight of the past anymore. It was the uncertainty of what came next. The penthouse felt different when they stepped inside. Or maybe Emily just felt different. She hesitated at the entrance, her fingers twitching at her sides, as if she was afraid to move too far in. The warmth of the place felt heavier now, like it wasn't meant for her. William noticed. "Emily," he said, voice calm, steady. She looked up. "You're staying," he said simply, "if you want to." Emily's throat tightened. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to belong." William exhaled slowly. "Then we'll figure it out." She hesitated. Then finally, she nodded. A small step, a fragile beginning. That night, she didn't go back to the couch. She stood by the guest room door for a long time before pushing it open, stepping inside as if the space might reject her. The bed was neatly made, untouched since the last time William had offered it to her. She sat at the edge of the mattress, running her fingers over the fabric. Too soft, too clean. She thought of Janet, Claire, of the fire, of the way her best friend had looked at her right before everything collapsed. "Go, Em! Don't stop!" Emily inhaled sharply, her hands curling into the sheets. She was still here. Janet had given her this chance. She wasn't going to throw it away. Slowly, carefully, she pulled the blanket over herself. It smelled like fresh linen, like something untouched by fire and smoke. For the first time in a long time, Emily let herself close her eyes. And this time, she didn't dream of running. The next morning, she found William in the kitchen. He was dressed in his usual crisp suit, coffee in hand, but something about him seemed lighter, as if the weight he had been carrying had shifted, even if just a little. Emily hesitated before stepping forward. "Morning," she muttered. William glanced up, arching an eyebrow. "Morning." She fidgeted, unsure of what to say next. But then, her eyes landed on the bookshelves in the living room. "Can I read something?" she asked, surprising even herself. William didn't miss the way her voice faltered slightly, like she was testing the waters. His lips twitched. "Of course." She drifted toward the library, running her fingers along the spines like she had done before. But this time, she wasn't looking for something familiar. She was looking for something new. She was looking forward. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, William called for her. Emily stepped into the living room, book still in hand. "What?" William motioned toward the dining table. "Come eat." Emily frowned. "I wasn't really. Come eat," he repeated, his voice firm but not unkind. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she set the book aside and moved toward the table. She sat across from him, her posture tense at first. But when William placed a plate in front of her, there was no hesitation in his movements. She picked up the fork. A small step, a fragile beginning. But this time, it was hers. Later that night, as she lingered near the fireplace, William passed by and stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, casually, without force, he said, "Good night, Emily." Emily blinked. Not Kid, not her, just Emily. It was the first time he had said it like that. Not out of habit, not because it was the only name he had for her, but because it was hers. She turned away before he could see the way her throat tightened. She wasn't sure what she had expected. But maybe, just maybe, this could be home. The day was colder than it should have been. Even as the sky stretched wide and cloudless above them, the air carried the sharp bite of late autumn. The cemetery was quiet, save for the distant hum of the city beyond its gates. Life moving forward, even in a place filled with the past. William stood motionless before the grave, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his coat. It was a simple marker. No grand statue, no ornate carvings, just a small headstone nestled among rows of others in the public section. J-A-N-E-T, the inscription read, nothing more. No family name, no history attached. But he knew now. Claire. The name sat heavy in his chest, tangled with regret, love, and something even deeper, a quiet, aching pride. Emily stood beside him, silent. Her fingers tightened around the small white flower she had brought, the only thing she had to offer. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, William exhaled. She was brave. Emily's grip on the flower tightened. She was, she murmured. William's eyes traced the letters on the stone, his jaw clenched against the overwhelming weight of what could have been. She saved you. Emily swallowed hard, then nodded. She did. The memory burned behind her eyes, the smoke, the fire, the sound of Janet's voice pushing her forward, even as the world crumbled around them. William let out a slow breath, his gaze never leaving the grave. She would have been an incredible woman. His voice was quiet, but sure. I have no doubt. Emily finally stepped forward. Slowly, carefully, she knelt, placing the small flower at the base of the headstone. For so long, she had carried this guilt like an anchor, convinced that Janet had died because of her, that she had stolen a life that didn't belong to her. But standing here, in front of the only place left that bore Janet's name, she understood something. Janet hadn't died for her to live in shame. She had died for Emily to live. Really live. A tear slipped down Emily's cheek, but this time she didn't wipe it away. Instead, she whispered, just loud enough for the wind to carry the words away. "Thank you." William watched her, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he reached out, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. It wasn't an answer. It wasn't closure, but it was something. A promise. A silent vow to honor the girl they had both lost. As they stood there side by side, the wind rustled through the trees, scattering a few golden leaves over the quiet rows of graves. Neither of them moved to leave. Not yet. Some goodbyes took time. The air was lighter on the way back. Not weightless, not yet, but something had shifted. The silence between them was no longer strained. Emily sat in the passenger seat, watching the city move past, the world continuing as it always had, unaffected by the storm inside her. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was drowning in it. She had said goodbye. And somehow, that made all the difference. The adoption papers arrived a week later. William had filed them quietly, not wanting to push, not wanting to pressure Emily into something she wasn't ready for. But when the official documents were placed in front of him, declaring her his daughter in the eyes of the law, a strange sort of finality settled in his chest. This wasn't about replacing Claire. This wasn't about filling an empty space. It was about Emily, about giving her something solid, a foundation that wouldn't crumble beneath her feet. He left the papers on the dining table one evening, not speaking of them, not pressing her to read them. He had expected hesitation, maybe even resistance. Instead, Emily picked them up, skimmed them quietly, and then looked up at him. "This is real?" she asked, voice unreadable. William nodded. "Only if you want it to be." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, without a word, she grabbed the pen and signed her name. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because, for the first time, she wanted to. The house no longer felt empty. It wasn't instant. There were still nights when Emily curled too tightly into herself, still mornings when William found her sitting on the edge of the guest bed, as if deciding whether she truly belonged in it. But then there were the small things. The way she left her shoes by the front door instead of keeping them close, as if ready to run. The way she stole books from the library and returned them dog-eared and worn, proof that they had truly been read. The way she lingered in the kitchen when William cooked, watching, hesitating, then eventually offering to chop something, always with a muttered, "Not because I want to help, just because you're bad at this." He let her have that. And then there was the laughter. It came slowly, hesitantly at first, in brief bursts and sarcastic remarks. But one evening, as she sat at the dinner table, William made some dry comment about his failed attempts at making pasta, and she actually laughed. Not small, not forced, but real. William paused, taken aback by the sound. Emily must have realized it too, because her expression faltered for a second, like she had caught herself doing something unfamiliar. But then she shrugged. "It was a bad joke," she said, stabbing at her food. "Don't let it get to your head." William huffed a quiet chuckle and shook his head. It was enough. More than enough. The last night of winter, Emily found herself standing in front of Claire's photo album again. She didn't touch it, didn't open it, just stared. William found her there, leaning against the doorway, watching her carefully. "You don't have to forget her," he said, after a long silence. Emily nodded. "I know." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Do you think she would have liked me?" William exhaled slowly, stepping forward, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "I think she would have loved you." Emily swallowed hard, blinking fast, before nodding and turning away. And just like that, something settled inside her. Months later, as they sat together at the dinner table, the air was warm. Emily ate without hesitation, without that cautious restraint she had once carried. She still had her habits, still hoarded bread like she might need it later, still flinched when silverware clattered too loudly. But she didn't look like she was waiting for something to be taken away anymore. William watched her, quiet. For the first time in years, he felt something real, something steady. He was not alone anymore, neither was she. And as Emily glanced up at him, rolling her eyes at whatever dumb thing he had just said, he realized something else. They were home. Finally. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.